Hey everyone, Leanne Pilkington here for the latest edition of Courageous Conversations. And with me, I have the incredible CEO of the Real Estate Institute of Queensland, Antonia Mercorella. Hi, Antonia.
Hello, Leanne. So nice to be with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. I can only imagine how busy you are at the moment.
It is definitely a crazy time.
It is, but certainly I know from my role at REI, and I'm just guessing that yours is the same in Queensland, we've actually picked up a lot of members during this, the COVID time, right? Are you finding the same thing?
Yeah, we are. You know, there's some real silver linings that have come from COVID. I mean, let's be honest, we'd rather not have it with us. But
Yeah.
I think I think when we face times of adversity, it's often when peak bodies can really demonstrate their relevance and their significance. And it's been really overwhelming, the support that we've received. But the other really wonderful thing about I guess what we've been going through is I've never seen the real estate industry work as cooperatively and as collectively as they have during this time. You know, really just coming together all to ensure that we're doing the right things so that we continue to have the privilege of being able to transact real estate. And really, it's been funny to watch the way everybody is prepared to keep each other accountable. So, and not in a nasty way, but sort of calling each other out. Don't do that. That might get us in trouble. We don't want to. And so that's sort of one of the really great things that have come out of this. And I'm hoping, you know, you just want to kind of bottle that up and somehow continue to spread that around when we're out of this sort of disastrous time. So
I completely agree.
Yeah,
the collaboration has been amazing. Let's hope we can continue. With that. So tell me, what was your career path to get you to this position as CEO of REIQ?
Yeah, it was a bit of a zigzag, certainly not. I didn't follow the most conventional path. So I've got my studies, my degrees. I actually have a background in theatre. So I did a Bachelor of Educational Theatre. That was sort of what I did. Straight out of high school, I auditioned for a course that was run out of Adelaide Uni, Performing Arts, and I finished that. Yeah, and then I went on and studied law, and then when I came out of law, I became a solicitor, got admitted, worked in a law firm and really disliked it, decided it wasn't for me, and I threw the towel in and went to work at the State Theatre Company in South Australia, which I always say was the worst paid job I've ever had, but also probably the most fun I've ever had too. Really, really such a great role working for a flagship theatre company. It was really outstanding. And then sort of following that, I worked as a mediator, as a conciliator. I had a really keen interest in alternative dispute resolution. And then I guess after a few different roles in a few different quasi-legal roles is the way I would describe them, I ended up getting a gig, and I was so shocked when they offered it to me, with the Real Estate Institute of South Australia about 17 years ago, I guess. Wow. I had just moved back to Adelaide. We'd been living in Melbourne. We moved back to Adelaide, which is where I'm originally from, and I got this job as a legal counsel for RESA, which was crazy because I hadn't practiced law for very long, and in-house roles are few and far between. So I would have been up against some really serious competition, had no background in property. To this day, I don't know what they saw in me, frankly, but they saw something, thank goodness. And so I moved into that role, and that's really what threw me into this real estate sector. And I just immediately fell in love with it. I started to try to do everything I could to learn about property and real estate, and so I stayed with RESA for a number of years, and then I left, and I ended up actually establishing my own law firm with my husband, and we did that. But I continued to work for RESA as their external legal counsel. So I've really stayed in this space. Really, I've been working in this space for close to 20 years. And then I ended up, we moved up to Queensland because my husband's a Queenslander. And we moved here about 10 years ago. And I just came to see the REIQ. It wasn't even with a view to coming to work here. It was more just to let the then CEO know that I was going to be in town, I was moving here, and if there was anything going, to keep me in mind. And then somehow he ended up convincing me to take a general counsel role with REIQ. And so that's where it started. And then I moved into deputy CEO role and then became the CEO about 6 years ago now. So if you had said to me that this is where I would be 20 years ago, 10 years ago even, I would never have believed it. I wish I could tell you that I was this really ambitious woman with a laser focus on being a CEO, but I'd be lying.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Certainly this is not where I saw myself either. So we all know that there's not a lot of female leadership in the real estate space. How do you find that, being often the only woman in the room?
It's definitely something I notice. I won't say I don't notice it. I do. I think I try not to let it impact me. I'm very much a believer in just being myself. So I try and just be who I am and be the best I can be. It hasn't prevented me from, I guess, progressing. But we all have a story, multiple stories, let's be honest, about conduct and being the only woman in the room and perhaps encountering behaviour that's less than professional. But I've got to tell you, it's not unique to real estate. And I mean, I've got to tell you, I've worked in law firms and there's some pretty interesting conduct that happens there. And so I try and just focus on myself, my own conduct, doing what I can to improve my skills, my knowledge. I feel like, though, what I will say about this, Leanne, is I have had the privilege of working with some really great people in my life, men and women. So now that I'm in this role, I'm in the privileged position of being a CEO, of being a leader. I make a really conscious effort with my team to help them to develop and to, in particular, I find that women have a tendency to hold back, to wait for the perfect opportunity. We can be quite self-deprecating. If there's a role going, we'll convince ourselves that, there's a list of 10 things, and unless we tick every single box, then we're not worthy. It's
a bit like the way you felt about the legal counsel job in South Australia, right?
Yeah, quite right. Good pick up. And so, it's funny how we're really good at giving advice to others, but not following our own advice. So, I mean, I try and do that in my role. I've got some outstanding young women here, and I've got lots of outstanding men too. But I do try and be conscious of that, and do what I can to try and help them to understand that, they're just as good, and frankly, in many cases better, and just really going for it. Because I do think we have, there's a multitude of reasons, I'm sure, as to why we do this as women. And I want to be careful because I know I am generalising, but, the biological reality is that we bear the children. Men can't. It's not biologically possible. And so there's that, there's those issues of potentially taking a career break or wanting to work part-time or the list is sort of endless.
And the other thing, I was talking about this with somebody the other day, and she said to me, you know what, Leanne, I'm ambitious, I'm good at what I do, but I just don't want to play the game the way the boys play. And I thought, you know what, that's probably true of a lot of us, because they do approach things very differently, rightly or wrongly, very differently to women, right?
Yeah. I know it's such a fascinating thing.
It is.
I reflect even on my childhood. I think about my male friends, my cousins. The difference in the way boys and girls behave, and just the way we view things and approach things. And yeah, look. Something I do love about working with women, and again, I am generalizing, so I'll apologize for doing so, but I always try and play things with a straight bat. I'm not one to play games, to your point. I don't have an interest in doing those things. So I find that I'm prepared to have some pretty tough conversations.
Yep.
In fact, when my husband and I ran a law firm together, he would run a country mile. He would do anything he could to avoid a tough conversation. And it was always, Antonia, that's your thing. And so I feel like, and I don't want to say all men aren't good at this, but I even see it in my own sons. I find that I'm the one in the family. It'll always be my husband will call on me, or my kids will call on me to have that tough conversation, to handle things, because I'm pretty black and white. Like, I just, the problem, I like to jump on it. I like to address it. Let's have a conversation and let's try and resolve it.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because I know there's a lot of men that I've worked with, and very senior, successful men, that avoid conflict like the plague. And let's face it, a tough conversation doesn't have to be conflict, right? As you say, you want to jump on it and get it straightened out. So I wonder if it's just a different mindset. It's a different way of approaching it. It's like, let's get to a resolution rather than viewing it as conflict.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. I think it becomes a conflict because you leave it. We all know how it works.
There's some great advice right there, right?
You've got this little problem that starts out pretty small, but you let it grow. And of course, as human beings, right, when we're annoyed about something, if we don't have a conversation with one another, it just grows and festers. And suddenly, when it explodes, you look like a freak, because you look like you've exploded over this one minor thing. But of course, it's not that minor thing at all. There's a much deeper issue there that's just been left unresolved for too long. So
that's so true. I guess you would have seen a lot of that in your mediation days.
Absolutely. The fascinating thing about being a mediator, and, the very first mediator gig I got was, I spent some time, I did some of my studies over in the US. I did some of my law degree through an international exchange program. Oh, wow. And that's where I first did my sort of first round of training in alternative dispute resolution. And I ended up going to work as a court mediator, but on really minor civil matters, Leanne. So I can't remember what the threshold limit was, but I think it was something like under $6,000. So we're not talking major commercial disputes. But what's fascinating about that is whether you are trying to facilitate a resolution of something that involves $2,000 or even $20, I might add, all the way through to a claim that's worth potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions. It's really interesting the way, when you break it down, you almost always end up at the same place, which is that there's just been a lack of communication, right? Like, it's just that this thing has gotten out of control because, communication was poor. You didn't establish the right parameters. People didn't understand their responsibilities and their rights and their obligations and all of those things. So I talk a lot about this. I feel like that training that I've been really fortunate to have in terms of that alternative dispute resolution training, and how to actually effectively negotiate and work your way through conflict. It's the most valuable training of everything I've ever done, of all the studies. That is by far the most valuable training, not just from a professional perspective, but even just from a personal perspective. So I would highly recommend it to anyone listening who hasn't done training in that area. And particularly for someone who works in real estate, it's invaluable.
And it would have been invaluable for you in your negotiations with government, because I know you've been instrumental in bringing through some pretty impressive reforms during your time with both South Australia and Queensland. Can you talk about some of those highlights?
I'd love to talk about those highlights because advocacy is my passion. I do love it. That's the part of my job I really love most. It's I think so. Both in South Australia and in Queensland, I was involved in I guess leading really significant legislative reform in both of those jurisdictions. And I think that what I enjoy about it is that balancing act that you have to perform, where you have to go in and clearly when you work for REIQ or RESA, you're barracking, if you like, you're supporting the industry you represent. But you also have to consider the other stakeholders. You have to consider the impact on consumers, on clients. Then you have to look at things from government's perspective. And that's what I really enjoyed doing, getting in a room and you come in with a list of things you want. They come in with a list of things they want and you negotiate your way through what's the stuff that is dying the ditch. We are not walking out of here until we get that. That is non-negotiable. And then
so is that where you start? Do you start with the absolutely non-negotiables? Yeah.
Well, it depends. I think it depends on who's in the room and the personality. So I don't know that there's a precise formula. I'm a big believer with starting with the difficult stuff because I think sometimes what happens is people want to start with the easy things.
Yeah, the quick wins.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden you get to the end and you're like, okay, now let's deal with the beast that we've all been avoiding. So again, from my perspective, I think it's beneficial to start with the really tough stuff. And then that way you can sort of focus on those big things and then the little things sort of fall into place.
Sort themselves out. Yeah.
But, I'm not saying it's not quite as black and white as that, but yeah.
And you did an incredible campaign during COVID, and I do want to talk to you about leading through COVID because it's an interesting time, and I found, and I'm sure you found the same thing, there are a lot of people out there panicking. There are a lot of people catastrophizing rather than focusing on, and I know you did the same thing that I did, you focused on the here and now, you focused on what you could do to help your members today without predicting the disaster that may or may not come down the track. Yeah, would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree. And I would say to you, Leanne, that it's probably been, we face lots of leadership challenges, but this is by far the most significant. But I try and find positive in everything. And I think it has made me a better leader. And it also makes... because I think what it really has made me understand is the importance that this organisation has to the real estate industry. Sometimes we make things harder than they need to be. What people were really looking for was just they were looking for hope and guidance. Even if there were some days when when I would do a video update and I would go, I don't have all the answers that they want, but I'll give them this piece of information and I'll tell them what we're working on. And people were so grateful for that, Leanne, knowing that we were touching base with them on a regular basis, that we didn't know what would happen next week, but here's what now looks like. These are the things we're working on, reminding them that we had the support here at REIQ, the various advice lines and services that we offer. People were so grateful, and I was really overwhelmed by the number of phone calls and emails where people were saying thank you. There would be times, a lot of the times I would do just, the videos were filmed on a mobile phone at my house, sitting on my couch.
Yeah.
And there were some times where I would get to the end of the video, which my husband would take on a mobile phone, and I would say to him, that was pretty dreadful. And he would say, why was it dreadful? And I'd say, well, I don't think it's enough. It doesn't give them all the answers that they want. And yet, immediately after it, people would be saying, thank you so much. That's so helpful. And so I think I think we convince ourselves that we have to know everything, and that if we don't know everything, we fail. And so I think it's taught me that if you're honest with people, about what you know, people appreciate that. People just appreciated, agents and the real estate community just appreciated knowing that we were in their corner, that we had their best interests at heart, and that we were fighting for them, and we were fighting for fair, and that really worked really, really well. And but I mean, in terms of that Everyone Matters campaign, I've got to say to you, we've obviously been, I'm really thankful. We've received a lot of recognition for that campaign, and I'm grateful for that. It was by far the most successful campaign I think this organisation has ever run in its history. But I have to say, whilst we led it, and I'm really proud of the work that REIQ did, no doubt about it, what's important to remember about that campaign is that it was effective because of the power of people. I know that sounds cliche, but, we led that campaign. Our Minister for Housing came out and made an announcement the Thursday just before Easter. And it was, what was being proposed was, there's no other word for it, just outrageous.
It was,
and so it devastated me, because on Thursday, just before the Easter break, I had to go on air and tell the real estate community what was being proposed. It shattered me. And so I sort of fell apart a bit that day, and then immediately the next day I woke up and I went, right, I'm doing, we've got a plan. And so I spent that entire Easter long weekend working on this enormous letter to the Premier about why they were making a drastic mistake, working on all the resources and tools for the campaign. And then we launched it. Straight after we got back from that Easter break, we launched it. Again, nothing more than a couch and a mobile phone. But because it was such an important issue, in 3 days, Leanne, they did a total backflip. Government did a total backflip. And I think the campaign ended up attracting about 440, like the engagement, it was about 450,000 people that got involved, and just volumes and volumes of letters being sent to the Premier. And that was led by the REIQ, but it was not just real estate community, like a big chunk of the Queensland community got involved in that. I've never seen anything like it. It was really phenomenal. It was extraordinary. And to be really clear about what we were fighting for, we did get, as you can imagine, we did cop some criticism from some segments of the community, which is always the way. But I felt like it was a very fair campaign. We weren't saying we don't care about tenants. We didn't say that at all. We never said that. We just said what you're proposing is unfair and just so ridiculously imbalanced, and it will shatter the value of property in Queensland and decimate property investment. And it would have, Leanne. I'm not one to... I believe you. Yeah. I don't believe in being hysterical, but in my heart of hearts, that's what I know it would have done. And where we landed in the end was a very, very fair outcome that absolutely took into account tenants' interests, and so I think it was a good outcome. And I think in the end, the result we got demonstrated that that the real estate community actually does care. That we're not, I think sometimes we are perceived in a certain way, and I think that's really unfortunate. And I think that campaign demonstrated that we actually do care. We care about everyone, and we just want fair, balanced, legislative frameworks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was a remarkable campaign. So congratulations to you on that. Congratulations to you on the way that you have led through COVID, because you've done incredibly, it's been hard. It's been a really hard time, but you have done a fantastic job. And what an interesting career. So thank you so much for taking the time. It's been really lovely.
Thank you, Leanne. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for inviting me on, and it was, really wonderful to also watch what REINSW was doing during this pandemic, and indeed all of the other REIs around the country. I think we should all feel really proud of our collective efforts.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We've all, I think everybody has really stepped up to the plate and demonstrated the value, as you said before, in the associations and the peak bodies around the country. So Thank you, and I will look forward to catching up with you very soon.
Thanks so much, Leanne.